Greetings and welcome. My name is Aaron Craig with Beyond Us Games, and in this tutorial, what we're going to be creating is a ghost dash. Something you've probably seen in several games, and I think it's a really cool effect, and I wanted to take a crack at making something similar to it. So I'm going to be making something like this. So you can click where you want to move, and then you'll dash there. It leaves behind a ghost trail, so you can kind of see where you've been, and I'll show you how to make this and modify it to make it faster or slower. But one of the things, the limitations of this specific system is that this is a teleportation system, so when I click over here, my character does instantly move there. So if there was an obstacle or enemy in the way, she wouldn't hit it. But I'm going to show you how to overcome this limitation as we program it, if that's something that you are really interested in making it work that certain way. But with that being said, let's jump into the tutorial. The art I'm going to get is from Open Game Art by the author Skoam, and it is a character that I think is pronounced Fumiko. I'm going to have the link for you inside of the description if you want to download that, and I'll show you how I'm going to use it here. So there's a bunch of different animations that you can see here. We're going to be pulling a few of those out to make it look like she's dashing, which I think looks really cool. So all we're going to need to do is download that asset, throw it into the sprites, and we have something like this. I'm going to open it up in the image editor, and I'm going to come in and zoom in and take the dash sprite right here. So there's 4 of them that we're going to take right here. So just right from the top, we're going to grab these. I'm going to cut them out, open up a new frame and throw them in there. Although I missed the top of her head, so let's try that one more time. So we're going to take as much of them as we can. Perfect. And then we're also going to grab one more, just a standing still sprite. And that's going to be this one over here on the far left. That way we have one that she kind of starts in and stops in. So I'm going to put that there. And then I'm going to add a couple more frames. And all we need to do is basically move these so that they're in the corner so that we can trim them properly. So I'm going to cut out each one as we go. And the reason I'm not converting these from frames is because they're all over the place. We're not just grabbing those 4. I wanted an extra one, and if we converted from frames, that would be a little bit trickier. So that's the specific reason we're not doing that in this one. So it's a little trickier, which is why I thought I would show it. Once we have all that, we're going to go ahead and image, auto trim all of the frames. And then we just want to make sure that they look like they're in the right spot. So the first one looks pretty good, but the second one I think is a little too high. So I'm going to move that one down. The same for these ones. I'm going to press Control A and move them down. This one I think should be a little bit off the ground, so that's okay. This one, the same for that. So that looks really good. Now I want to have like a landing cycle as well, so I'm actually going to copy the second to last frame and put it in there and move it. Same thing for the next one. And this way it's kind of a full landing movement animation cycle, but I'm only going to have it be like that. I'm not going to copy the first frame in because we're going to, through code, set it to revert back to the first frame when we're done. Okay? So if we watch that, I think it looks pretty good, but she's also really small. So we're going to go in and resize our sprite to 46 on the width and then just maintain the aspect ratio. And now she's a lot larger and still looks pretty good. Okay, so we're going to change that speed to 20 and call that good. Now we've got our sprite. Let's rename it to SPR Fumiko. And that's all we need to do for the sprite. Now we need 2 objects. We're going to make obj Fumiko, and we're going to make a obj Fumiko dash ghost. So we're actually going to be creating some ghosts that are just the sprite, but they are going to have a little bit of code inside of them, and we don't want to create more of like the main player, because if you have a game, that main player is going to have a bunch more code, so you want to have a specific object that is just for the dashing and the ghosting, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. Okay, so let's set the sprite for both of them. And the dash ghost, let's go ahead and set up because it's actually fairly simple. There's just one event with a few lines of code. So we're going to add a step event. And inside here, we just need it to fade out over time. So we are going to say image alpha minus equal 0.25 and 0.025. And this is a number that you can change as much as you want. This number I found works really good with Fumiko, especially with the amount of sprites that we have for her animation. If you have a longer animation, you'll want to bring this number down maybe to like 0.01. If it's a shorter animation, just a quick dash, you might want to bring it up to 0.05. Remember, the step event happens 60 times a second, so you don't want a large number, otherwise it's going to just disappear instantly. So we're decreasing the image alpha over time. Now we want to check to see when we are at 0, we want to destroy ourselves. So if image alpha is less than or equal to 0, then we're just going to die. Okay? The other thing that we want to do inside of here is set the image so that it doesn't continually animate on itself. As soon as it reaches that last image, we want it to just stand still. The way we can do that is by checking which image index we're currently on. And the image index is the current number for the actual sprite part that it's showing. So image index 0 would be the first one, then 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Now, it starts counting at 1, so when we get to, what is this, 8? It's actually going to give us 8, but when we're checking it in code, we need to do a little bit of subtraction because we always start counting at 0 normally, but image index is going to actually return a different number. So when image index is greater than or equal to our image number, and image number is just the total amount that we have, so this is going to return 8, but when we're checking, there's only 7 that we're actually checking because we start counting at 0. So we need to say image number minus 1. And when we reach there, we set image speed equal to 0. So we're decreasing image alpha, but our image speed is already set to 20 because that's what it is in the sprite. So it's going to be playing through, and as soon as it reaches the last image, it's going to stop right there. So we can actually check this out by going to our room. We can put in a ghost, and I'm going to change the background color so it's not pure black. Let's change it to a dark blue. Okay, so if we run this, this will just fade out over time and play the animation. And you can see that do instances. You can see that it stops right away, like on the last image index, it stops there and it doesn't go any farther. So that looks really cool. That's the ghost that we're going to be creating. I'm going to delete all of those. And we're going to go back into our workspace and work on our Fumiko object proper now. So we've got the ghost working properly. Now all we have to do is dash from one point to another and then make a certain amount of ghosts in between. So the first thing we want to do is add a create event because we don't want this object to be animating. So we're going to say image speed is equal to 0. So we don't want this one animating at all. Now we're going to add a draw event first, or right after that, because this is where we're actually going to be dashing. So inside here, we're going to be checking the left mouse button. So we're going to say if mouse check button MB left. So if we are pressing the left mouse, then we want to be drawing the sprite of where we're actually going to be going, just as a visual representation that we're actually going to do something. So we're going to draw sprite extended so that we can say draw it at half alpha. So we're going to draw our sprite index, subimage of 0, and then the x is going to be mouse x, mouse y. The x scale is just going to be 1 and 1 for the x and y. Rotation will be 0, which is normal. Color is C white for just normal, no changes. And the alpha is going to be 0.5. That way, it draws about half opacity, and you'll see that I think it looks really good. Last thing, don't forget, draw yourself. Now in our room, let's add in obj Fumiko, run that, and we'll be able to see that now we can do that right there. So that looks really cool. One little change that we can do is instead of drawing our image, our sprite 0 here, we can actually change that to the last image index that we have. So we can do that by saying the total image number minus 1. And if we do that, it's going to actually look like that's where she's going to dash to. And I think that looks really cool. And that's partially why we didn't complete the animation. That way, it looks like she's going to dash over there. And I think that looks really cool. Okay, so that's our draw event. Now, for the bulk of the code is inside of the step event. And here, we're going to dash. So there's a fair bit that we need to do inside of here. And a couple of it is going to be a little complicated. We're actually going to make a dynamic path, and I'm going to explain why we're doing that. But if you don't have much experience with paths, then I encourage you to look around and play with it. But making a dynamic path is actually not that complicated once you know a couple of the finer points, which I'm going to talk about here. So what we're going to do first is check if we are actually going to dash. And we do that by the release of the left button on the mouse. So if mouse check button released MB left, everything is going to happen once we release the left mouse button. First off, we're going to make a path. Now, the reason we're making a path is because when we want to dash for this, we're actually going to be moving from point A to point B, and it's going to be a perfectly straight line. And that's all we have to do. So we need to figure out where we're going from our starting point to the end, and I realized that a path could actually be done really easily, and then there's information we can pull from that path, which allows us to make ghosts along it, and it works really, really effectively. Because we're just doing a straight line from where the character is to where the character is going to be, it's fairly simple, okay? So we're going to create a dynamic path. We're going to say var path is equal to path add. And that right there is all you need to dynamically make a path. Now, the path is completely empty. There's no points. There's no data. There is a couple there's a little bit of data already set, and we're going to talk about that because if you don't, it's kind of confusing. So one of the things that you can do with paths, which I'll show you really quick, is that a path can be closed. And a closed path means that the last point closes in on the first path. Now, for whatever reason, when you make a path closed, like in here, the closed is false. But if you make a path in code, that closed option is true. So we need to actually use a function called path set closed, pass in the path we made, which is just called path, and we want to set it to false. If you don't do that, then anytime you make a path dynamically, you're probably going to get some funky things happening. So keep that in mind. Now we need to add 2 points, the point where we are and the point where we're going. And there are functions for that. So path, add point, pass in the path we're using, and then the first point is the starting point. So x, y, okay? And then the speed doesn't matter because we're not actually going to be moving along this path. We're just going to be getting coordinates along it. So you can set 0 for the speed or 1 billion. It doesn't matter. We're going to add one more point, and that point is where we're actually going to be moving to. So that's going to be mouse x, mouse y. Okay, so that actually gives us our path. Now, currently, it doesn't do anything, and that's okay. If you want to see that we're actually going to be doing something, one of the last things we're going to be doing is actually moving our character. So we can come down and do that because, like I said, this is just a teleportation system. So all we have to do is set x equal to mouse x and y equal to mouse y. And if we do that, it's actually going to instantly teleport us right now. Okay? So that's how that works, and that's essentially what we're going to be doing. We're just going to be creating a ghost trail in between so that it looks like she's dashing, and it looks a lot cooler. Okay, there are 2 more things that we need to know. The first one is the distance. So we're going to make a local variable called distance, and we're going to set this equal to the point distance from ourselves to where we're going. And this is partially why it's important that we move her last, because we need to get the distance, and if we move first, then x and y are going to be the same as mouse x and mouse y. And that's not going to work. Now, there are going to be a few bugs in here if you just do point distance, because this actually gives you a decimal number. So instead, we're actually going to round that number up with the function round so that it's nice and even. And the reason it gives you errors is because we're actually going to be getting information about the path, like the x and y coordinates along the path. And if you pass in decimals to the path, I found that it tends to crash. So let's not have that happen. Now, the last thing we need to know is how many ghosts we actually want to make. And this, for me, was kind of the tricky part, because we want to make a number of ghosts equal to the length that she's moving. So if she's moving 30 pixels to the right, probably just want to make one ghost. But if we're moving 300 pixels, we want to make a lot more. We always want it to look fairly even of the amount. So we're going to make a variable called ghosts to make, and we're actually going to use the rounding function called sealing, S-E-I-L, and we're going to round this so that there's always at least one. And the math we're going to do here is just the distance that we just grabbed divided by, and here, depending on how many ghosts you want to make, you can do a lot or a little. I'm going to put 64 because I find that that gives it just about enough width in between our sprite, because our sprite is 68 or 46 on the width, so it gives it a good amount of ghosts in between without overlapping. If you have a larger sprite, you might want to upgrade this, or you could actually say sprite width if you wanted to always have them be about the same width apart. Doesn't really matter, but that's the number you're going to want to change if you want more or less ghosts. Okay? Now comes for the actual creation of the ghosts. We're going to do a for loop. So this for loop is going to be a little bit different because most of them start at 0 and like increase over time. We're actually going to start at 0.96 and we're going to decrease this over time. So we need to check to see if we're greater than 0. And then we're going to be subtracting I by 0.9 divided by ghosts to make. Okay, so I starts at 0.96, and the reason for that is because we're actually going to be getting the x and y coordinates of our path, and we're going to create a ghost like directly behind where we are just teleporting to. And this is going to be 96% of the way through the path. And then we're going to be making sprites, we're going to be making our Fumiko dash ghost along that path, an even amount of the amount of ghosts we want to make. And the reason we're starting up high and subtracting is because we're actually going to set the image alpha of our ghost to be equal to I, so that the ghosts further back, like the ghosts that, so if we are starting in the right over here and we're dashing over here, the ghosts over here are going to start at a lot less image alpha than the ghosts over here, because we came from over here. So I think that kind of makes sense. And as we decrease I, because we're creating ghosts as we go along from where we're going to be all the way to where we've been, the ghosts over here are going to have the least amount of image alpha inside of them. Okay? So let's make some ghosts. Var ghost equals to instance create depth. And we are going to get the x and the y of the path that we made. The way we do that is with the function path get x, and we need to pass in the path we want, and then the position is just the percent along the path. So we want to do I, so starting out, it's from 0 to 1 you can pass in here. So this is going to be 96% of the way through the path. That's the x coordinate we want to get. And then we want to do the same for the y. So path get y, path I, so that's going to give us the x and y. The depth is just going to be depth, and the ghost and the object is going to be the dash ghost. Okay? Now we're going to say ghost.imageAlpha is equal to I. Now that is going to set the image alpha correctly, and we can actually already go ahead and test this, because for the most part, it's going to be working properly. So we click over here, and there we go. Now we're moving from one place to another, creating a bunch of ghosts. If we don't go very far, then there aren't that many ghosts. Now, one last thing we want to do is change the sprite of where we dash, because right now it looks kind of odd because she's just standing up already. So we are going to move Fumiko, and then right after we do that, we're going to change that sprite. So we're going to animate a little bit. We're going to set the image index. We're going to set it equal to image number -1. Now if we try this, it'll look a lot nicer. So we come over here. So the ghosts stop their animation on this image index, and that's where we stop as well. So it kind of looks like, that's where she ends up. I think that looks a lot better. Now we're not totally done yet, because we did a dynamic path up here. We created a path. We need to destroy it. Otherwise we're going to have memory leaks. So we need to destroy that path with path delete. And then we want to reset our animation so that we stand back up after we jump. Just a little touch that I think looks good. So we're going to set alarm 0 equal to 40. Come in and set an alarm. And all we have to do inside of here is actually just set image index equal to 0. And that's it for making a ghost dash that I think looks pretty good on this character. So we come over here. After the ghosts disappear, you can see she stands back up, like she jumped over there. I think that looks really, really cool. I think it looks really good too. So these are numbers that we're using for this specific sprite. If you've got more images or less images, then you're going to want to increase the image alpha subtraction over here so they disappear faster. You can make more ghosts for yourself by dividing by a smaller or a larger number, depending on what you want to do. And you can also change the amount that this is being divided by if you want to make a ton of ghosts like that. So those are all things that you can change. Now, one of the things I mentioned at the beginning was that this is a teleportation system, which is true. Now, if you didn't want it to be teleportation, there's something that you could do, and I'll show you how to do that here, in theory. So if we are making ghosts along our path, one of the things that you can do is when you're making those ghosts, you could have some code inside of here, inside of your ghost dash, and you could be checking for collisions. So if you had enemies along the way, or you had pickups, collectibles, something like that, you could have your dash ghost have an event. And it says some kind of checking. So if it collides with a pickup, then you want to raise a flag. And then inside of our for loop, where we would break out of this for loop, we would stop making the ghosts because we ran into something, whether that be good or bad. And then we would go back about one ghost length, which we could do by just adding that ghost length. So you would just say I plus equal, that amount right here. And then that's where you would actually put Fumiko. So instead of putting her at mouse X and Y, you would actually just put her back to where that initial collision was at, if you wanted her to stop. If you didn't want her to stop, like it was just a pickup, then you would just have a collision inside of your dash ghost, and you would just add that pickup to Fumiko, to your object, to your player. And then she would just have that once she reaches there. Because these ghosts are objects, and you could easily have them have collision events with pickups, with enemies, stuff like that. So that's one way you could do that. That's what I would suggest. But I don't want to cover that here because this is just for making a ghost dash. If there's enough interest, I will be glad to do something like that. Just shout out in the comments or find me on Patreon. But that's what I've got for you today. A cool looking dash ghost that I'm really happy with and I think is really cool. If you appreciated it, let me know. If you have any ideas about what you'd like to see next, also let me know. Find me on Patreon and Twitter. I make courses and YouTube videos, and I would love to connect with you. So that's what I've got for you. Thanks for joining me, and as always, have fun making great games, and I will talk to you later.